What would you do if you woke in the small hours to feel a stranger's hand resting against yours, and then your legs lifted off the mattress on their own? That is the moment that changed everything for one man in New Mills, and today we're going to try to uncover the shocking truth behind the Billy Brown encounter. Early on, a quick note. This account was shared with Weird World by a viewer, and we'll link to their coverage in the description so you can see the original submission. If this story is grabbing your attention, check that link after the video. Billy's house sits on a quiet street near the Peak District, in a top-floor room with a skylight that looks out over sloping roofs and thin clouds. It's the kind of attic bedroom that gathers small sounds at night: rain on tiles, distant traffic, a clock's small tick. According to Billy, he was asleep when something woke him sometime in the early morning hours. He estimated it was between about 3 and 5 a.m., a time when the world is still and the boundary between dreaming and waking is thin. He told Weird World that he became aware of a noise first, a quiet sound that made him open his eyes. The skylight let in a patch of pale, indifferent light. In that half-light he saw a figure beside his bed, not tall, perhaps around 4 feet from where he judged it, and with a shape he described as grey-like. Billy said it had an elongated head, a presence that did not move in hurry, but occupied space like an object. He did not describe a screaming, violent intruder. Instead, he described something that approached and then touched him. The contact was simple and focused. The being placed what Billy perceived as a hand against his own. He said their palms met. At the moment of touch, he felt intense heat pass through him, not a burning pain, but a sudden, overwhelming wave of warmth that filled his chest and spread through his torso. It was so distinct, Billy said, that he later kept returning to the single word: heat. Heat, he told investigators. Heat, again. It registered for him as the most concrete sensation of the encounter. Along with the heat came another odd bodily reaction. Billy said his upper body felt rigidly seated, but his legs began to lift several inches off the mattress, as if some unseen force nudged them upward. Importantly, he did not feel pulled in the way a person might be yanked. Rather, he described it more like a levitation. His legs rose without his will, then stopped. When he moved his hand away from the being, the contact ended, and the phenomenon ceased. The figure, Billy said, simply vanished into the dim air beside the skylight. He was startled, but not panicked. He lay there for a moment, processed what had happened, and then, against what you might expect, tried to go back to sleep. That, too, is part of what makes this account unnerving. He walked away from the bed, back to a semblance of sleep, and carried on with his life until something else began to appear. What followed in the days after the attic incident has been described by Billy as a rapid and terrifying decline. He told doctors he developed an unrelenting headache that would not ease. Eating and drinking became difficult. Sleep evaporated. He experienced vomiting and diarrhea that left him weak and disoriented. He said his strength burned away in a matter of days. Simple tasks felt like mountain climbs. Then, at a point he recalls with shaky detail, he began coughing up blood. Friends and a housemate, people who later found him and called for help, saw a man falling apart under symptoms that, on the surface, looked like a severe infection. Paramedics were called. Those first responders moved quickly, according to Billy's account, and he was taken to a regional hospital, Stepping Hill, as he reported. Tests were run: blood panels, imaging such as a CT scan, the kind of battery doctors run when they cannot immediately see what is wrong. Billy said he was told that no clear source of infection could be found. The early hypothesis from hospital staff was that they might discharge him once he stabilized. It was only when Billy spoke of the attic incident that the conversation shifted. He said the staff pursued deeper testing, and over time, his condition worsened enough that he was moved into intensive care. The eventual hospital diagnosis, as reported, was blood poisoning, sepsis, a life-threatening response to infection. Billy's story emphasizes that despite that diagnosis, no obvious entry point for an infection was established. In his telling, tests came back inconclusive of a specific cause. What makes the medical portion of Billy's story especially frustrating from an explanatory standpoint is that the clinical narrative does not neatly accept a single answer. Billy said doctors ran blood tests and scans. He said a selection of further investigations, including some that look for underlying markers, were performed without producing a tidy conclusion. He woke later with pieces missing from his recollection. His friends described a man who had crossed to the far edge of life and returned fragile and altered. Recovery, Billy said, was uneven. Sleep became episodic and carved into fragments. Dreams visited him in bursts, vivid, quick, and then fading like polished stones down a stream. He struggled with a new, ongoing sense of vulnerability, as if the border between ordinary nights and the unknown had thinned permanently. After the worst of the illness, months passed. Billy regained strength but not full equanimity. He told the investigators that he felt watched sometimes, or at least that the possibility of being watched had settled into his life like a low-grade ache. Then, on a cold evening the following December, while driving home from his cousin's house, Billy reported seeing something that brought him back to the attic with a sudden, uncomfortable symmetry. He was on the motorway near the M66 and M62 corridor, moving toward Manchester. A light flickered across his windscreen and caught his attention. He said he initially thought it might be a reflection or a low-flying aircraft, but the light resolved into something else. By his account, a vast cloaked object moving slowly through cloud cover, positioned above the motorway. He described a ring of green, a plasma-like halo, and within it, rotating spokes, like the dimly lit ribs of a wheel turning lazily. The object, he said, appeared to be enveloped. He used the word cloaked to express how its outline seemed muffled against the sky, rather than sharply defined. For a few seconds it cast localized light through the cloud above his car. Then, with a smooth, accelerating motion, it moved away toward Manchester and vanished. Billy remained calm during this second sighting, at least by his own account. He did not stop the car to take a photo. He said he had no image to prove the moment, only memory and the sense that the object had been more observational than aggressive. He told those who later asked him that the incident felt like a check-in rather than a pursuit, something that had noticed him again, perhaps noticed how close he had come to death earlier in the year. Taken together, these three episodes, the attic contact, the rapid and unexplained illness and the large object over the motorway, form the spine of Billy's account. They also form the hardest part of the problem for anyone trying to adjudicate the truth. Are they related? Can one weave them into a single narrative of cause and effect, or do they remain coincidental and unrelated? Billy believes there is a connection. He told interviewers he thought at one point that he was never meant to wake. Whether that belief reflects perception, interpretation, or something else is precisely what makes the case compelling and difficult. There are several plausible, non-extraordinary explanations to consider. First, the attic episode might fall into the category of hypnagogic phenomena, vivid sensory experiences that appear in the borderland between sleep and wakefulness. Hypnagogia can produce convincing tactile and visual hallucinations. People report feeling pressure on their chest, seeing figures, or experiencing paralysis while their mind perceives movement or contact. The timing, Billy estimated, the deep night hours, is classic for such phenomena. That said, hypnagogia typically resolves without producing days of systemic illness, which leaves the medical portion of his story separate and unresolved. Second, the subsequent illness could have been the result of a serious infection, autoimmune response, or toxin that simply evaded easy detection at first. Sepsis can be triggered in many ways, and sometimes clinicians struggle to identify the source even while treating the systemic reaction. Billy's descriptions of tests and scans failing to pinpoint a cause are, sadly, not unheard of in medical practice. Without access to full hospital records, it is impossible to say more than what he reported, that an intensive care admission for sepsis occurred, and the doctors could not explain the initial origin of the infection. That ambiguity does not confirm the attic contact as causal. It does, however, leave a gap into which other interpretations can drift. A third possibility is misidentification of an otherwise ordinary nighttime animal or person, combined with an unrelated illness that subsequently followed. Attic spaces are not immune to small animals or to the presence of other people in unusual circumstances. Billy's description, grey-like, small elongated head, fits certain kinds of imagery that have been culturally circulated about non-human entities, which can shape how people interpret ambiguous nighttime shapes. But again, interpretation is not proof. It's a way the human mind makes sense of fragmentary input. There are also, for completeness, more speculative hypotheses that some external intelligence was present and that the physical contact had effects on Billy's body that manifested as illness. Those possibilities are part of why cases like this attract attention in the UFO and anomalous encounter communities. Billy's later sighting above the motorway, the green ring and rotating spokes, resonates with descriptions other witnesses around the world have provided in different contexts. But caution is necessary. Anecdotal similarity does not equate to empirical confirmation. The responsible stance is to hold these possibilities in tension. We can acknowledge patterns without declaring their meaning. One detail that resists tidy interpretation is the nature of the sensations Billy reported at the moment of touch. Intense heat, levitation of his legs, and a rapid, lasting decline in health. The sensory specificity makes a purely psychological explanation less neat. The physiology he described, sudden weakness, gastrointestinal distress, bloody coughing, suggests a bodily event. Yet medicine, as much as anyone, knows that perception and physiology are deeply intertwined. A traumatic experience can precipitate stress responses, hormonal cascades, and behavioral changes that impact health. At the same time, a pathogen could create symptoms that are misread or contextualized through memory and narrative. The net is wide and muddy, and Billy's emotional state through all of this is important. He did not present himself as a fantasist or a showman. To his friends and to those who later spoke with him, he came across as genuinely unnerved and puzzled, a person who had found himself at the center of a sequence of events he could not easily place. He described fragmented sleep and intrusive, fast-fading dreams. He told investigators he felt that a thin boundary now separated his nights from something else. Whether that perception is caused by an outside agent or by the psychological impact of trauma and serious illness does not erase the reality of its weight in his day-to-day life. We must also respect the procedural reality. The account came via Weird World, submitted by a viewer. That channel provided the initial framing and access. Where the story has holes, and it has many, we should be cautious about filling them with the kind of confident language the title promises, but the facts do not support. The title asks us to discover the shocking truth. The truth here is uncomfortable. There is a credible, consistent witness account of a tactile encounter. There is a documented medical crisis that ended in sepsis and an ICU stay, as Billy reported. There is a later sighting of a large, unusual object above a motorway. The correlation in time and perception between those episodes is striking, but correlation is not causation, and the absence of corroborating documentation, photographs, multiple eyewitnesses, clear medical records accessible to independent review, prevents a definitive resolution. So where does that leave us? For viewers who already lean toward the conclusion that something non-human occurred, Billy's account will add one more emotionally textured narrative to an existing pile. For skeptics, the sequence reads as an intriguing but ultimately ambiguous set of experiences that could be explained by known psychological and medical phenomena. For neutral investigators, the case is a reminder of how messy real life can be. Vivid perceptions, medical mysteries, and the human impulse to connect dots even when the connecting material is missing. There is one further unsettling possibility to consider, the sense expressed by Billy himself that he had been observed again months later. Whether that means he was truly monitored by an external intelligence, or whether he misinterpreted a rare atmospheric or man-made phenomenon, is a question the available evidence cannot settle. What it does suggest is a human response. When something extraordinary happens, we look for meaning and patterns. When the world refuses to yield them, the ambiguity becomes part of the story. If there is a single defensible takeaway from this encounter, perhaps it is this. Some experiences leave scars not because they prove a particular theory, but because they change how the person who lived them stands in the world. Billy's life, his nights, his trust in his own senses, his relationship with risk, is not the same now as it was before that attic. That alteration is real, measurable in his behavior and testimony, even if the precise mechanism behind it remains hidden. We will not conclude with a dramatic pronouncement that the truth behind Billy Brown's experience has been finally revealed. The most honest conclusion is that the case resists a neat label. It is both compelling and unresolved. A tactile contact reported in a dim attic, a subsequent severe and unexplained illness culminating in sepsis and ICU care, and a later sighting of a large cloaked object with a green rotating ring over the motorway. Those three elements together form the shocking truth the title promises, not because they provide conclusive proof of a particular theory, but because when stacked, they create a pattern that demands attention. If you've seen something similar, or if this account raises questions in your mind about medical causes, psychological phenomena, or aerial anomalies, please share your thoughts in the comments. If you want to read the original submission and Weird Worlds coverage, the link is in the description. Share this video with someone who's intrigued by mysteries like this, and consider subscribing for more careful investigations into cases that sit between explanation and wonder. Whatever your interpretation, the Billy Brown encounter remains an uneasy reminder that some nights keep their secrets, and some people come back from them changed.